and you're listening to Teacher Talk, an ETT Podcast production.
And you are listening to Teacher Talk, an ETT podcast. Today, I am joined by Diana Hong, who is a elementary hybrid math learning partner with the Toronto District School Board. And I am super excited to talk to Diana today about all things math, math pedagogy, and a little bit more specifically about the Building Thinking Classrooms approach, which we've heard so much about. I myself have implemented in my classroom. I've gone through the training. TDSB has invested quite a lot of resources and funding and staff to implement this resource. So I'm very curious to hear more about it from Diana today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Diana and welcome, Diana. I'm really excited to speak to you today. And I'm just going to kick off with asking you to tell us a little bit more about yourself. Tell us about your educational journey. Tell us about your teaching career and how you got into this amazing position as a hybrid math learning partner.
Thanks for having me. It is a very exciting thing to talk about. But in the beginning, before I actually dove straight into education, my mother was a huge advocate for me to become a teacher. I think, your parents know you better than anyone. So my mother was always saying, you should become a teacher. And she worked for the TDSB as an OA. And she said, I see a lot of your personality and your characteristics in the teachers I work with. You should go into that. And after 4 years of psychology, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go the clinical route. So I actually ended up becoming employed by TDSB as a lunchroom supervisor and then emergency supply teacher, an EA, SNA. And I did that for a couple years to see what it looked like. Did I want to go into the more intense spec ed support through child psychology, or did I want to actually dive right into an actual classroom, be there and try and be proactive rather than reactive to the students that maybe have already gone through the IPRC process? So after a couple years of working for TDSB, I went to Australia for Teachers College. I really enjoyed how they designed their practicum as opposed to the one in Ontario. Actually, it's very heavy practicum based. One of the first things they said to us was, there's only so much you can learn within our four walls of this classroom. You actually have to be immersed into the classroom in order to experience it. So that was a huge eye opener as well for me. And I got to experience a lot of real assessment, real teaching in my practicum. So I was very thankful to go there. And a huge part of my educational journey, I think, has been the people that I have encountered. When I first started teaching, I had very, very supportive administrators who right off the bat, they saw I was very bright-eyed, bushy-tailed green person that's like, I will do everything. Anything you throw at me, I will do. That energy, like, I'm going to fix the world. I'll fix everyone that I encounter. But I was very eager to jump in. And at the time, smart boards were new in schools. So I was a huge proponent of ed tech. Inquiry-based learning, especially in early years, had just launched, and I was a part of a couple ministry projects in the schools I was working at. And I had a lot of administrators as well as superintendents come and see me speak either at an ed tech or at an inquiry-based learning workshop. And actually, our director was one of one of my biggest fans. Actually, she would have me, she was my SO at the time, she'd say, Diana, can you come speak at our admin meeting that I'm holding, or can you come speak over here? And she would introduce me to people and say, I think you'd really enjoy being a part of Tacit. It was Tacit before DLL. And that's actually how I got into a lot of the kind of the small niches that allowed me to grow, and I got to make a lot of connections and see what's out there. But as in terms of math, I was not a math person growing up. I grew up with a
Really?
mathematician. My father was an
Okay.
engineer, architect. He loved math, but I did not do math the way he did. And for me,
Mm-hmm.
math was terrifying. I had
Mm-hmm.
sweaty palms, tears, crying. I had so much anxiety growing up with math because I knew that I was not a math person. I was told over and over I didn't do math right. I was not a math person, and that sometimes that I was stupid and that I couldn't do math and that I would be lucky if I could pass it. And I was told that on a regular basis whenever math came into the conversation. So for me growing up with math, it was very frightful and
Mm-hmm.
wrought with a lot of pain and anxiety. But then I got to high school, and in grade 9, I went to summer school for math. And I'll never forget because the summer school teacher, his last name was Wiley. He was a like Wiley Coyote. But he taught me grade 9 math in a completely different way. He showed multiple different ways of solving one question. And I thought to myself, I thought there was only one way. I thought there was only one way that was right, and that this is the only way you could get an answer. And because of him, I passed math with a 90. I threw myself in. I tried all of these different strategies, and unfortunately, my father kind of depreciated that by saying, well, it's summer school, so it's supposed to be easier. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not really a 90. You probably got a 50. But I was still very happy with that, even though he might have said otherwise. And from there, from grade 9, I definitely tried to find those alternative ways of thinking. Even if the teacher themselves didn't offer one, I tried myself to find other resources or people who I could access to help me through that. And I think as an educator, I always think back to myself and how would
Mm-hmm.
I want to learn. And then I see that in my students a lot. And when the math coach position came up, I thought, okay, I would love to help some children who maybe have experienced some math trauma like me, or who may not be as confident in themselves as a math person, and how to become more confident. And I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of students are lacking, is that confidence. A lot of them know that they have to do math, that they can't escape it. They may not have to like it, but we do want them to build that self confidence in themselves. I know I can do it. Might not be my favorite thing in the world, but I can get through it and I know what I'm doing.
That's amazing. I loved hearing your story. There are so many pieces that I can relate to through your conversations about growing up and learning math and knowing or hearing constantly that there's one way to do it and you're doing it the wrong way. And I think that um, you brought up the math trauma and the math anxiety. So much of it comes from this idea that there's this hierarchy of the way that things need to be done, and that's just not the case. And I really love that you are bringing that conversation into your math pedagogy and talking about that, because it's very important for students to hear that from an early age, that it's not just one and done, that there's just this one way to solve things. And I think that, employing this thinking approach really allows us to get past the process, or past the end result, I should say, and focus more on that process. And that everybody has a different way of processing things. So I love hearing about that, and I love hearing about your experience with your parents, and hearing how that can also add to that anxiety as well. You're growing up either with somebody who's very advanced in a particular subject area, or the other end of that spectrum, you've got parents that don't know enough about a particular subject to really be able to push you through many of those anxieties that you might have. So we're either making those anxieties worse, or we're not really able to address those anxieties. So definitely there's a lot there that we're going to get more into throughout this conversation. But I thank you for telling me more about you as an educator and as a teacher, and more about your journey through math. You also seem like you have a lot of varied experience with teaching. from just your early experiences with TDSB and being, lunchroom supervisor or EA or SNA, and making your way into these different areas. So thank you, Diana, for that great introduction and for telling us so much more about yourself. I myself am very intrigued and looking forward to getting to know you better today as well. But let's dive into some more conversation about building thinking classrooms. Now, this is a math approach. It's a book that's written by author Peter Liljedahl, and Peter has done um, many PD sessions with teachers in the board. And I believe there still is training that's being offered for teachers within the board about the building thinking classrooms approach. And I think as we talk about, focusing on that process part of math, this dives very heavy into that. And I've implemented many concepts. I myself teach grade 6 this year. I've dived into this approach much more. I've put it into practice since learning more about it last year. But can you go over with the audience and with those that are listening and watching about some of the key concepts in building thinking classrooms and how we're using those in the math classroom and in this thinking approach that helps to build up students' processes and the way that they process math? Tell us a little bit more about that.
I really like the way that Peter phrases a question to us whenever he begins any kind of PD. He starts off with, if we're not giving our students something to think about, they will not think. And if students aren't thinking, then they aren't learning. And that really hit home with me. When I first read the book 2 years ago, one of my colleagues said, have you read this book? You need to read this. It is revolutionary. And whenever I hear something that's saying it's revolutionary, I think, wow, you don't really often hear that about educational books, like revolutionary framework. And I thought, okay, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to delve into this. And it actually did change my whole perspective on teaching. I am very much an inquiry based kind of person. I really think that a lot of learning should come from students' own inquiries and questioning. So my whole pedagogy has been very IBL based. But after reading this book, I thought to myself, you know what? I need to give more autonomy to my students. Because a lot of times we see our students and we think that they know a concept. We've gone through it with them over and over. And then when they're expected to try it on their own, they seem lost. And as educators, we always think to ourselves, why don't you know this? We've gone through it.
Mm-hmm.
You looked confident. And then on your own, they seem to flounder. And we wonder, is it us? Is it something that we did? Is it them that they didn't quite get what we wanted them to get? And it's a combination of both. Us as educators, we have this sense of we need to have control and we need to have the power in the classroom to provide them with a structure that they can follow. And we expect our students to follow and we expect them to have that same interest that we do. But a lot of the times, our students need to know why. Why are we doing this? Why is this so important? And why
Mm-hmm.
do we need to follow this prescribed set of instructions in order to achieve a goal? And then when those instructions change or they're not exactly the same as when we provided them, they're at a loss because we didn't provide them with the means and the skills necessary to think on their own critically. So that's one of the big things about the building thinking classrooms. How do we provide our students with the skills for them to become critical thinkers? And the book goes through 14 different factors, 4 different toolkits, and the factors have been clustered together that introduced educators to how you can cultivate this kind of environment for your students where they can flourish, but also with very small shifts in our teaching. And it is a gradual thing, but even though it might seem gradual on paper, when teachers see it, it is a gigantic shift for many
Mm-hmm.
teachers, especially if you've been teaching a certain way for many years, or even if they're a brand new teacher, the way they learned in the classroom or what they saw in Teachers College, this could really be an opposite end of a shift for them. Rather than a
Mm-hmm.
teacher being at the front of the classroom, we realize that a teacher can be anywhere and that the learning doesn't have to come from a teacher. It can come from within a student, and changing that focus and that shift. So for me, I think that the building thinking classrooms, that ability for teachers to change very small aspects of their own teaching in order to achieve certain goals. So providing a different working space. Instead of it being on paper on a desk, now we're standing up on a vertical surface, whether or not it's a blackboard, a whiteboard, glass, something that is erasable, not permanent. That permanency scares students. It even scared me as a child,
Yes.
being wrong. Being wrong was the worst, especially in my household. If you were wrong, everything you did after that, you were trying to make up for the fact that you were wrong that first time.
Right.
And for some students, the moment they're wrong, they can't continue. They are already wrong and everyone knows they're wrong, and they kind of fall within themselves and they don't have that confidence anymore. And that comes with understanding that math has a right or wrong answer. And we're taught
Right.
that from
Yeah.
from infancy, that there's a right way and a wrong way to do things.
That's
And
right.
unfortunately, for a lot of students, they grow up and they think, well, if I'm wrong, then that's the worst thing that can happen. And when you're right, you're so thankful that you're right and
Mm-hmm.
that you fear being wrong. So, from the Building Thinking Classrooms framework, we're trying to encourage them that you can be wrong, and that is perfectly okay. We should try to be wrong sometimes, because otherwise, where is that learning going to come from if we're not wrong, if we make no mistakes? And having that wipeable or removable surface, if you make a mistake, no biggie. We'll just fix it. We'll erase it, almost like it never happened. But I actually try to encourage my students to reflect and embrace the mistake or the errors, because without them, we may not have been able to find the answer. So I actually tell them not to erase it, because we should always be able to look back. Because if we erase it, what if we make that same mistake again and we think, oh,
Mm-hmm.
have we been here already? Why are we doing this again? It's now becoming cyclic. So I try to always tell them, keep your mistakes there, because as we know with Back to the Future, never ever go back and try to change the past. Bad things happen,
Right. That's right.
Always reflect on your journey. Look to see where you've gone, because we have learned from that. That's your journey. That's your learning journey. Never try to erase it. You don't want to erase and pretend it never happened, but we do have to learn from it in order to become better thinkers for our future. So oh, sorry. I kind of went on a tangent there.
That's all right. No,
Do you want
I'm
me
totally
to?
immersed.
Okay.
What would you're more than welcome to. I mean, what I wanted to get into next was the implementation. So I
Yes.
know you've already kind of talked about the workspaces, the vertical workspaces and the
Hmm.
non-permanent, because I 100% agree that having the ability to race, whether or not we do,
Hmm.
that's a little slightly different conversation. But just that non-permanent space, I think it does something for the student. It allows them the ability to, as you said, make those mistakes and to learn from them. And I have seen a huge shift in students and the way that they approach math, just knowing that they have that ability to erase and try again, and erase and try again. And so that definitely finds its way into the conversation. Now, you're welcome to add to some of the different aspects of thinking classrooms, but you may also speak about the ways that you've seen it being implemented, and some of the ways, any anecdotes that you might have to share about either that, the non-permanent space, the vertical space, or any of the other aspects from the book as well. Please share a little bit more about that, because I find that the learning is much more, as you mentioned earlier, when you immerse yourself in the practicum of it. And so I think that hearing those stories, I make connections as well. And I'm sure that those that are listening are also able to make those connections with many of these pedagogical shifts or these aspects of the building thinking approach.
Yeah, there are a couple aspects of the thinking classroom that really blew my mind actually when I saw how it changed my
Yeah.
classroom. So I began implementing it on day one in September, and it was a huge change for a lot of students. They aren't used to, they're not used to standing for that long.
Hmm.
And that was the number one complaint. Why are we standing? Why can't we sit? And one of the things I asked them was, well, isn't this great? You're normally sitting for hours and hours, and instead I'm getting you to stand. Like, isn't that a nice change? And for some of them, they were like, yeah, okay. Not sure how I feel about that. And some of them were like, no, no, I enjoy sitting. Because
Yeah.
for them, sitting means that they can, A, be a little bit more anonymous. They're not
Hmm.
standing up, you can't see them. And B, they can kind of relax and become less active when they're sitting.
Hmm.
They can kind of be more sedentary. But one other aspect of building thinking classrooms that was a huge change for my students in particular were the randomized groupings. And
Yep.
that is in the first toolkit of building thinking classrooms. And I thought it was a huge important part to implement because of the social aspect of school. School is highly social, and for children, that can either mean a great thing or a really terrifying thing. And for some students, being with their friends is everything. And for other students, being with friends is also everything because they may not have as many, or they may not have any at all, or they may
Hmm.
have that perception of, I want to belong and I may not feel like I belong. So if we're providing students with an opportunity to belong without those social constructs in there, I think that that's great for everybody. So in the very first day of school, I handed all of them a playing card, and they were very excited because they got to choose it themselves, and like, yes, I think she's going to do a magic trick. Some of them were very disappointed, but it wasn't quite a magic trick. But I did tell them, you're going to look at your card and you're going to sit at the desk that has that matching card on it. And they were very excited. And there were some students who were not very excited, and they said,
Hmm.
well, I don't want to sit with those people. I don't know them. And some of the other students said, well, why do I have to sit? How long are we going to sit here for? And so I explained that we were going to have randomized groups every single week. At the start of the week, I would
Yep.
randomize them because in life, we are not always going to be able to work with our friends. We're not always going to be able to work with people that we know really well. And we still need to learn how to get along together, how to live together, how to be civil, and how to be kind human beings. And whether or not you are become best friends with that person or you just become an acquaintance, but it's supposed to teach them how to be with other
Hmm.
people. And in the beginning, they were like, oh my gosh, this is going to last forever. And I'm like, you know what? You can survive 5 days. You can do 5 days. And really, we're not going
Yeah.
to be sitting here for that long because I randomized them for gym. I randomized them for
Yep.
science. I randomized them for math. So really, they're not really sitting with that desk group for very long. And once they started to realize that, it did take them 2 weeks. I had complaints for
Yeah.
2 weeks straight every day. But after those 2 weeks, they started realizing, you know what? It actually isn't that bad. You're right. I'm not with these people for very long. And surprisingly, some of them were able to make different friends. Even though some of them have grown up together since kindergarten, this is their 8th year together. They don't know anything about the other person because they just weren't in their social circle or their friends, their friend group. And I saw some students who were started hanging out at recess or asking to go to the library with someone different. And I even asked them, I said, oh, I didn't normally see you guys hanging out at the start of the year. And she's like, yeah, she reads the same books as I do. I didn't think she was that kind of person. I'm like, see, so many wonderful
Well,
things
there you go.
can
Yeah.
arise just by being in another grouping that you may not normally put yourself into, and just allowing yourself to accept other people.
Absolutely. I have to agree that I had the very same experience with my students with my class this year. We also do. I use randomized groups for all kinds of things, and at the beginning it was very much, just the moans and the groans. Oh, we're doing this again. Oh no, I'm going to have to work with people I don't know or people I'm not friends with. But then as you're moving from group to group and you're watching students and how they interact with each other in their randomized groupings, you really come across some cool gems, like the way that they communicate with one another, the way that they help each other, the way that they hand each other the marker, and just hearing them talk and communicate really shows that they are building this authentic community amongst each other by having this opportunity to work together, because they don't have to be friends outside of this grouping. They don't have to, they don't, as you mentioned, many of them did become friends, but they don't have to. This is not, a way for them to force themselves to become friends, but they build that respect and acceptance of one another in that educational learning space. And that, I think, is such an invaluable experience for students to be able to have at whatever grade level you implement this at. For myself, it's grade 6, and I've never seen that kind of respect, that peer to peer respect, being built in any other in class setting. Like I've put students in groups to work on projects together, but it ends up becoming a fight. It ends up becoming this
Mm-hmm.
student is not doing anything, the students, I've had to do everything myself. But this has really allowed for me to be able to put them in these kinds of situations more so than I've ever seen in the past. And it did take that time. It did take that time
Yes.
to build up that community, but it's been so valuable for the classroom learning experience that I will never go back from doing this in the future. It's definitely something that I will keep doing. That this randomized grouping, I still get the moans and the groans every once in a
Yep.
while, but
Mm-hmm.
that's normal. Sometimes they're
It
just not
is.
feeling. I also don't always feel like being put into a group when I'm in a group setting, but the fact that they can manage it, I think
Mm-hmm.
is such a big skill to learn. Anyway, I didn't mean to
Oh,
throw
no,
that in
no.
there, but I just felt that connection and it was so important.
Yes, it's really nice to see when students have that, I know, epiphany or that idea that they've discovered something about someone else. I remember it was
Mhm.
around October. They had just gotten into the groove of being in randomized groupings, and I was around one group and they were working on decimals and rounding decimals. And one of the students had been writing the answer, and I've implemented in my class marker club, like Fight Club,
Mm.
but marker club.
Okay.
So the number one rule of marker club is there's only one marker, and the second rule is there's only one marker, but also that the person who has the marker is supposed to be writing down the ideas of the other two people and not their own, because otherwise you have someone
Right.
who's just monopolizing the whole thing. So
Exactly.
one of the students was writing down the ideas, and then they said, I think that's wrong. I think what you told me was wrong. If we round 0 and 6/10, it should be 1. It doesn't go down to 5. It goes up to 1, 1 whole. And the other students were like, no, no, it's closest to 5. And she said, no, you're trying to round to the next group of 10. And so then she was trying to explain that to them. And I was going to say compadres. Her friends or in her group were looking at her and they said, "Wow, you're really smart." and she says, "Really? Well, I don't think I'm smart. I just think that's what the answer is." And they're like, "No, no, you're really smart." And I was just overhearing the conversation. I was kind of standing back, and she says, "Well, I don't think I'm smart. I just think I know that that's the answer." And then one of the students said, "Well, I just said you were smart, so your appropriate response is to say thank you." And she said, "Well, no one's ever said that about me before." And then they said,
Oh,
"Well, you are." And I thought to myself, I'm like, oh, like so many things just happened in this one conversation. Someone
yeah.
recognizing in their peer that they're intelligent, being able to hear that from someone else, and then actually admitting, no one's ever said that to me before. And
Right.
then for them to reaffirm that, well, you are smart. And it was a lot of
That's so
growth.
powerful.
Yes, it was a very
Yeah.
powerful moment. And I thought, this is what this framework was built for. It was to provide students with that opportunity to see in each other where the
Yeah.
intelligence can grow, and that ability to mobilize that knowledge within themselves and
Yeah.
also within that whole classroom. And I think that that has
Absolutely.
been, yeah, one of the greatest things to enjoy in watching my students grow is that in the beginning, they were very possessive. They were like, this is our work. This is our math. You can't look. And they were very much, this is our intellectual property. We answered this question. And eventually, we all talked about how, we're not in a race to see who graduates from grade 5, 6 first. We're not in a race to
Hmm.
see who is able to complete this work first. We're here to help each other and as a team. We're here to gain some more mathematical experience points. How much XP can we gain in order for us to help ourselves up to the next level? And we're not in
Right.
competition with each other. And after my students realized that we're all here to help each other, they were actually looking at each other's work, not with the intention of borrowing or copying, but to actually make sure that they were on track. So I would see some students looking over and saying, "Hey, you know what? I think that question is incorrect. I think you missed a step, or I think you read that question wrong." And then the other students were like, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, if you just look right here," and they're like, "Oh," and I'm seeing a lot of that now, especially as we get into our second term. Our students are
Yeah.
walking around and they're noticing and naming this different steps, or they're trying to help each other out, or they're even going and saying, "You know what? We have no idea how to answer this question. We need some help. Can you help us?" And that also
Right.
takes the onus off of the teacher, that the teacher is not the gatekeeper of information and answers. It belongs to the collective knowledge base of our students. And that, I think, is a really wonderful way of looking at a thinking classroom too. Is that we're only one person. The teacher shouldn't be the one that has all the answers, and that it should be
Absolutely.
within the whole group.
Absolutely. The big vibe that I get from this is, one, obviously the focus on the thinking and just being able to build those skills about how to think. And if we're not thinking, then we're not learning, as you mentioned before. And so that it for sure. And then also that collaborative piece. I think that those are the two big shifts from a more traditional or a sort of antiquated math classroom that we are trying to move away from, where it's all about the independent learning and what I can do on paper by myself because of the way that I've mimicked the teacher doing it on the board. And so those are the two pieces that I take away from the most. And the entire framework and all of the toolkits that are offered through this book allow the students to be able to do those things and to really build upon math. Anytime that I tell students that, when you get into like university level math or higher education math, and this is something that you've pursued for a long period of time, a math problem is not something that you are finishing in 15 minutes or even an hour or even a day. It can take you days or weeks or months or long, long periods of time to be able to solve that math problem. And we have to have that ability to struggle through it, that we're not giving up, that it doesn't mean that if we don't get it right away that we're not going to get it. We just have to sit with it and struggle with it a little bit. But this makes me want to ask about what challenges you've seen. Like, when does it get to the point where you feel as a classroom teacher, this isn't working, or something isn't going the way that I hoped, or I'm feeling like this isn't working? And then to follow that up, are there other math pedagogies or things that you have learned about in your mathematical teaching career and what you have learned about math that you implement along with this approach? That sometimes you need to try something that's a little bit different or merge a few things together. Because as a practitioner, I never put all my eggs in one basket. I have to rely on my own professional judgment and also what I have learned about the students that I have in front of me, or whatever else that I have learned about the community, about the school community, the wider community, and how to put all of these pieces together. I think that there's been some pushback in regards to just putting everything all into one basket and just relying very heavily on this one resource or this one tool. But maybe you can offer a little bit of insight into how it integrates with other pedagogies that we've learned about. So tell me a little bit about some of the challenges that you might have seen, and maybe how you are approaching challenges with not just the thinking classroom approach, but perhaps some of the other pedagogies that you've learned about along the way in your math journey.
I totally agree with you. I think that's one of the biggest questions I get as a demonstration classroom. When people come to see me, they say to me, how often are you implementing building thinking classrooms? Is it 100% your program? And where are you finding your resources? Do you just use one? And I think, like any educator, we're always pulling from various different resources and books, because you're right, there isn't just one book that has all of the answers and all of the pedagogy that we need, because we base it on our students' needs as well as where our group is at the moment, what is working and what isn't working. And like any classroom, I have ELL students, I have students who are on modified IEPs. I have students who are not our traditional learner, who might need alternative settings or alternative workspaces and conditions for them to learn. And a lot of the times, it's the social part of the thinking classroom that can be daunting for some. I have some students who are not the best group workers because there are
Mhm.
aspects about their own learning profile that do not lend well with randomized groups. And for those particular students, sometimes they need to buddy up with me. So I do give them the option. I say, you can continue to work with your group if you like, but I would also love for you to go for a walk with me. And I will have them walk with me and we will look at other people's work and I will ask them for their opinion. What do you think about what they've done with this question? Because not only am I checking whether or not they understand, so it's my own check your understanding moment with that student, but I'm also giving them time away from that group setting that may have been causing some anxiety or may have been causing some discomfort or just not in the realm of their ability that moment. And for some students, they welcome it. Some of them do not like going for walks with me. They're like, oh, why am
Mhm.
I with you again? I would rather just be with my group and do whatever I'm doing. And that
Right.
is that is a challenge, because for some students, they would love to be working with their group, but for whatever reason, the conditions don't provide them that ability to do that. And
Mhm.
it's no fault of their own. I also have some students who like to be the stallers. They would like to go for a bathroom break rather than work with
Right.
their group, because it's easier for them to remove themselves so they feel less uncomfortable about not knowing the math. And when I notice that, I'm always walking around with my phone. Like my administrator always comes in and says, "How come you're on your phone?" I'm like, "Don't worry, I'm gathering data." And I have a code of emojis. So I have, every single time there's a list of my students' names, I have a check mark as I'm walking around that yes, they know the work. They can think on their own and with a group. And then I have that, that thinking emoji where it's like, like that.
Mhm.
And I put that down when I'm not sure if that student understands the work at this moment and I need to check in with them. And then afterwards, I implement guided math groups. So I will work with a set of students that I've found, okay, we've got a lot of emojis for these particular students. Their moment may not be the same, but I will try and meet with several of them that I find are similar areas where I think they might need a little bit more reinforcement or a little bit more explicit teaching in a guided math group. And sometimes when they're doing check your understandings, I will pull them one by one just to check whether or not they understand a concept or strategy or they know how to use a tool effectively. Because if they are feeling lost in a group, I need to make sure that I'm providing them with the means to be more confident in their own abilities when they come back to a group. So a lot of the times,
Yeah.
yes, I am implementing building thinking classrooms, but I also recognize that there is an advantage of having students grouped together, especially if there is a misconception that is the same amongst all of those students. group them together, have a mini lesson with them while everyone else is doing check your understanding questions. That way I can address those students in a smaller group setting. They don't feel that the eyes of everyone else, or feel that, oh, I don't know the answer right now. So I do provide that kind of setup in the classroom so that my
You
students
know,
can,
I
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh
You
no,
can
no, it's
finish.
okay.
I interrupted. So, I was gonna say I actually really appreciate hearing that as a classroom teacher, because I know that there's as a educators who are new to the building thinking classrooms approach. This is always an anxiety that I have heard myself, and that I had myself when I first started. That, wow, I'm going to have to, forget about everything I know about math, about teaching math, and go all in on this concept, and learn how to do it all first, and then implement it. And then what if I don't see, all of the brilliance that I am supposed to be seeing? What if I don't see that excellence shining through? What if I see students having a really difficult time transferring what they have been working on in their vertical spaces with forms of assessment that they are used to seeing, like tests or quizzes? What if I can't do it? What if this just doesn't work? And it gave me, and it continues to give me, a lot of comfort in knowing that I can still employ those guided math groups. I can still employ different forms of checking your understanding throughout the unit. I myself will use a thinking classroom approach about once a week in my classroom, because that's what works for me. And then the other times I have students working in small math groups, or they are working independently, or they're using a online tool like Knowledge Hook or Khan Academy to gain some further understanding. So I'm piecing together many different pieces, many different parts, to create this whole, in the hope that they're going to be taking something positive away from it. And we already know that we need to be differentiating. We need to be providing many different learning opportunities for students to achieve that success. And this is another way to do that. This is a tool. It's a resource kit that we have access to, that we can employ. I've seen success in my classroom from employing this. Not every student is going to take away from it the same as others in the classroom. So we use our own knowledge and understanding of math concepts. We utilize, hybrid coaches or math partners, K-12 math coaches, to help us with develop these skills in the classroom. The resources are all here. It's a matter of, are we going to welcome them into the space, and how are we going to put them into practice, which is not an easy task, especially with everything that teachers have going on throughout their day. But I've really enjoyed listening to your explanation of it, and also many of the strategies, the ways that you've employed it in your learning space. And I think that that is fantastic. So I'll let you address anything that I mentioned as well. But as we wrap up this conversation, I'd love to also, on top of that, hear a little bit more about Diana, and what Diana is up to, and what's on the horizon, and what are you working on next, and where and how can we connect with you if we'd love to connect with you further.
I really like how you said that, we're, as educators, we're always looking and trying to figure out how to use our professional judgment to choose what's best for our students' learning environment. And yes, building thinking classrooms is a framework, but there are so many different frameworks out there. And you have your own permission to be able to pick and choose what you implement, what you're comfortable with. And if you're not comfortable with implementing the entire toolkit all at once, don't do it. Only do what's comfortable for you, because in the end, it's going to be your students. You and your students are in the end. No one is going to be like, oh, you only got 12 out of the 14, or you only got 5 out of the 14. Your own learning journey is what we're looking at and we're reflecting upon. And that reflection piece is really big. As a math coach, I didn't get to implement it from the very beginning, and I only got to help implement it in several classrooms throughout the years. And this was the first time I was able to have my classroom from the very start and implement all 14. But even though I have implemented all 14, I'm constantly reflective of my own ability to implement them. When is it working? When is it not? How can I do it better? Am I doing the best for my students by using this particular format for assessment, for example? So, one of the things that my students say they love the most, if you ask them, what do you like about a thinking classroom the most? They were actually just interviewed recently on this. A lot of them said they love test time. They enjoy taking tests. I still give tests and quizzes.
Yeah.
And even though I have a different format, there's mild, medium, and spicy questions they can choose from. I do have conditions. You must choose two mild, three medium, and two of your choice. They said that they like it because they have choice. And that
Right.
I always ask them, how do you feel about taking a test? Do you think you're ready? And if you're not ready, what do you think we need in order to become ready? Because I told them, we're still living in a world where tests, exams, quizzes are still a basis for how we gather information. Now,
Hmm.
in my classroom, I do say that it is not weighted anymore because I am gathering data from multiple points. I am triangulating from their group work, from independent check your understanding, from assessments, from all kinds. But in high school, their exams are weighted. If you go to university, your assignments, your exams are still weighted. They're not going to gather and triangulate and see how you
Right.
did on group work. So I said, until that world changes, we still need to prepare you for that world, but they still enjoy taking tests. They said tests are so much better now. It's like a menu. I get to select what tastes good or what looks
I
good
like
for
that.
me. Yeah. And they said, I know you put in conditions, like sometimes I'll say you have to choose this or you have to choose that. But I know I'm ready because throughout the whole entire their math journey, we have our notes to our future forgetful selves. So that note taking skill that we want them to develop, they're taking notes that make sense to them. Not necessarily
Hmm.
notes that are just on the board because we have told them this is what you should know. Notes that are meaningful to them. This makes sense to me. This note may not look like my friend's note, but I know that when I look at it, I know exactly what it means and I know how to use that note. So for me, I've seen a lot of growth in that aspect. They said that they really enjoy working with other students, that they said, if you don't understand something, that's okay because somewhere in this room, someone can explain it to you. And you just need to know how to find it, find that person or find that opportunity. So I feel like my students have become successful at thinking critically, but also not feeling helpless. Like if I don't have the answer, like I'm lost, in that bug's life where the leaf falls and like, I'm lost, I don't know how to get
Right.
back home. My students all have the skills necessary to find out how to find the answer. Maybe not the answer itself, but the means to find the answer and to get themselves there. And I think that has been very powerful for me as an
That's
educator
amazing.
to see them. Yeah.
Amazing. That's so great to hear about. And anything else coming up?
Um Not really. I'm kind of just doing a lot of PD for building thinking classrooms. If you're in the TDSB, you're very welcome to come visit my classroom, hang out with us. It is a full day demonstration classroom, so you hang out with my students for math, and then in the afternoon you hang out with me, and I help to either help you with some resources or build lessons and whatnot. And yeah, it's been a wonderful year of learning for me as well as for my students, but also I get the best of both worlds. I get to be in the classroom but also be a math learning partner, and I feel like it's been the most wonderful world of actually a combination of worlds together because they
Yeah.
help me be better for the
I have to
educators I help.
say that visiting an exploration classroom is probably one of the best things that I ever did for my practice. It is the best experiential learning, and you get to see things happening in an authentic and a real space. It's not like a manufactured space. This is a real classroom. And then
Hmm.
you get the opportunity to debrief about it, which is the thing that we never get, is that chance to debrief. So please reach out to Diana if you are in the TDSB and book a time that you can go and visit her classroom and ask some more questions about the thinking classroom approach, or any other math pedagogy that we talked about today. I want to say thank you so much, Diana, for joining me and giving us your time and talking about math. It's a joyful topic for myself, and I know that there are so many teachers that are listening that are going to gain so much from this conversation. So I want to thank you again for joining us on Teacher Talk and ETT Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Teacher Talk, an ETT podcast production. We hope you enjoyed this insightful discussion. We'd like to remind you to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps us reach more educators like yourself. Don't forget to visit our website at ett.ca. There, you'll find additional information and resources from ETT. The ideas and opinions shared on this podcast are our own and do not represent the viewpoint of any organization. We aim to provide a platform for open dialogue and thought-provoking conversations. If you have any topics you'd like us to cover or any questions you'd like us to address in future episodes, feel free to reach out to us on social media or email teachertalk@ett.on.ca. We love hearing from our community. Teacher Talk is a Chey&Pav Educational Services production where we strive to bring you the best educational production and professional development. You can connect with us at cheyandpav.com for all your podcasting needs. Until next time, keep inspiring, keep teaching, and keep making a difference in the lives of your students.